Okay, so how exactly does internet culture take raw, totally unfiltered voices and use them to just completely dismantle modern political norms? Today, we're diving straight into a fascinating explainer centered around a really unapologetic internet personality. We're going to see exactly how one commentator frames her as a direct challenge to modern political paradigms. Seriously, this is such an interesting case study in how digital culture highlights the messy, entirely unpredictable contradictions in the way we talk about politics today. Let's get right into it.
Here is our game plan for today. We'll kick things off with the Auntie C phenomenon, take a quick detour into AI privacy and daily grievances, explore politicians and the spirit world, and then wrap it all up with the cultural paradox. All right, part one, the Auntie Cry phenomenon, an unfiltered voice. So the commentary introduces us to a woman known as Auntie C, and she is framed as this emerging, undeniably unapologetic Australian folk hero who speaks with absolutely zero filter. I mean, right out of the gate, her extreme bluntness is fully established. In her introductory clip, she is aggressively pushing back against viewers who somehow misidentified a mole on her forehead as a cultural mark from another country. She uses an incredibly expletive-laden rant to firmly assert her Indigenous Australian identity. The commentator points this out right away to show us that she simply does not care about politeness, optics, or public relations. She's raw, she's aggressive, and she is highly opinionated.
And her commentary rapidly swings across these wildly distinct categories, forming what the commentator lovingly dubs the Encyclopedia of Auntie C. Listen to this. 1 minute, she's aggravatingly detailing mundane, everyday complaints about her family, her pets, or how long an Amazon package is taking. But then, the very next minute, she is furiously taking down systemic corporate greed and fuel prices. And then, literally without missing a beat, she jumps into actively hostile political stances on immigration and protests. The commentator is just completely captivated by her ability to apply the exact same level of fiery, high-octane intensity to every single topic, no matter how monumental or incredibly minor it might be.
Moving right along to part two, AI privacy and daily grievances, from the cloud to the kitchen. Now, before diving into the deeper systemic rants, the commentary actually takes a surprisingly stark detour. We get this highly technical integration of an AI privacy sponsor juxtaposed right up against Auntie C's domestic frustrations. The commentator abruptly pivots from this raw, unpolished folk hero to discuss very modern concerns over OpenAI's data handling and the creeping introduction of ads inside ChatGPT. He pitches a privacy-focused alternative called Venn AI, emphasizing that it operates totally anonymously and uncensored. He even shares this practical anecdote about using it to effortlessly analyze a massive encyclopedic car manual to save hours of time. It's a totally jarring shift, right? Going from visceral human emotions straight to modern tech privacy. But it really highlights the fascinating whiplash that's just inherent to digital commentary. Returning to Auntie C, the commentator spotlights her highly relatable daily complaints. And honestly, her list of grievances is as mundane as it is hilarious. She launches into these expletive-filled rants about painfully slow Amazon deliveries, or wondering what mysterious creature, she suspects it's a possum, is making that terrible scratching noise up in her roof. She laments the sheer exhaustion of kids, dogs, and cats relentlessly demanding her attention for 16 hours a day. And just to top the whole thing off, she throws in some incredibly sharp disdain for OnlyFans creators showing off online. The absurdity of jumping from possums in the ceiling to online creators is just a core part of her chaotic charm. And this perfectly captures exactly why the commentator finds her so deeply relatable. After playing a quote about her sheer, unadulterated frustration with her family constantly needing something from her from the minute she wakes up, he shares a personal anecdote of his own. He talks about coming home totally stressed out from a trip to the park with his kid, trying to find a simple saucepan, and in a momentary fit of rage, just throwing pans across the kitchen. We've all kind of been there, haven't we? He uses this story to build a connection, showing that Auntie C's unfiltered anger is a really universal feeling. Sometimes the pressure just builds up, and you need to let the valve go. Which brings us to part three, politicians and the spirit world, escalating the rhetoric.
Now this is where her rhetoric quickly escalates from the household straight up to the systemic. The sheer whiplash is just incredible. 1 second, she's yelling about pets and a possum in the roof, and the very next, she is directly targeting the highest government officials in the country. She directs her anger right at the Prime Minister of Australia over the crippling cost of living and rising fuel prices. She demands immediate action over how the global economic system is crushing everyday people. Her delivery is so deadpan and deadly serious that the commentator jokingly dubs her the true voice of the Australian people, speaking for everyone who's just utterly frustrated by the current economy.
Then, in what is honestly a truly bizarre, surreal juxtaposition of modern economics and indigenous spirituality, she turns her attention to large, greedy corporations. She warns these massive conglomerates that the spirit world actually has a much larger population than the physical world, and that this vast spirit army is going to enact cosmic revenge if they don't lower their prices. The commentator finds this specific blend of everyday economic grievance, backed up by a literal supernatural threat, incredibly entertaining. I mean, it's such a wildly unpredictable way to argue for lower gas prices, isn't it?
And finally, part 4, the cultural paradox, breaking the oppression pyramid.
The commentary then reaches its climax by shifting into highly controversial geopolitical and racial territory. The commentator plays clips of Auntie C explicitly demanding a total halt to immigration, flatly stating there are too many immigrants coming into the country. He points out that this sets up a really fascinating political dynamic. Her status as an Indigenous woman essentially provides a shield against traditional left-wing criticism that would normally immediately attack this kind of anti-immigrant rhetoric. And this paradox perfectly lays the groundwork for an even more extreme viewpoint from a second, unnamed, older Aboriginal woman featured moments later. We are then introduced to the second Aboriginal woman, who aggressively attacks pro-Palestine protesters. She tells them in no uncertain terms to stay away from her people. But then, the rhetoric culminates in a truly shocking demand. She explicitly calls to reinstate the White Australia policy, flatly stating they don't want any more brown people or Muslims coming into the country. It is a stunning, stunning escalation of the anti-immigrant sentiment. Now, if you aren't deeply familiar with Australian history, you really need to understand exactly what this policy was to grasp the sheer paradox happening here. The White Australia policy was a deeply exclusionary historical framework specifically designed to keep non-Europeans out of the country. So, making its endorsement by an Indigenous Australian woman is profoundly contradictory and frankly stunning to the commentators analysing it. So the absolutely crucial point here is this exact head-on contradiction. On one hand, you have the identity of a historically marginalized Indigenous group, but on the exact opposite end, you have an explicit endorsement of a fiercely xenophobic, historically white supremacist immigration framework. Seeing these two fundamentally opposing concepts combined in one person creates a total ideological short circuit for modern political categorizations. The commentator uses this extreme rhetoric, even jokingly coining the highly provocative term Aboriginals to describe the clash, not necessarily to endorse the racism, but as a blunt tool to expose what he perceives as a fatal flaw in progressive metrics. He gleefully asks how a typical left-wing activist would even handle this woman. He's really highlighting the sheer absurdity of trying to categorize a deeply unpredictable individual human being using standard, rigid, progressive scorecards. He essentially argues that this woman's very existence breaks the oppression pyramid, which is a sociological concept many of us have likely encountered. It attempts to rank marginalized groups based on their level of historical or systemic disadvantage. So he's wondering aloud, whose victimhood actually ranks higher in progressive circles when two historically marginalized groups, in this case Indigenous Australians and Palestinian immigrants, are pitted fiercely against one another by the very people supposed to be at the top of that pyramid? Ultimately, analyzing this commentary leaves us with a really vital, lingering question. How do digital commentators weaponize these shocking, paradoxical viewpoints to actively challenge and dismantle conventional political discourse? Whether it's an unfiltered personality yelling about possums and fuel prices, or an older woman fiercely demanding historically exclusionary policies, the internet absolutely thrives on voices that refuse to fit neatly into predefined boxes. It's raw, it's messy, and it forces us to confront the absolute unpredictability of human opinion. Because really, at the end of the day, who actually gets to decide where someone fits in the modern political landscape?